SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. If you're a new listener, thank you from the bottom of my teacher's heart for being here. I know how valuable your time is, and I'm honored you'd share it with my guests and me. And thanks to returning listeners as well. You keep this podcast going. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Dale. Joe was a teacher for 13 years and is now an independent languages consultant. He's from the UK and works with a range of organizations such as the BBC, Skype, Microsoft, The Guardian, and many more. He's a regular conference speaker and recognized expert on technology and language learning. He has spoken at conferences and run training courses around the globe, and is currently co-hosting a 10-part series of webinars called Saturday Tech Talk in collaboration with the British Council in Indonesia and ITEL. He was recently described in a Guardian article as an MFL guru, meaning modern foreign languages, and the man behind the MFL Twitterati. Today, we're going to talk about how technology can help students gain a deeper understanding and appreciation for modern foreign languages and cultures. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Mr. Joe Dale, welcome to the podcast. I am honored to have you here today.
Hi, Natalie. It's been a fantastic offer to be on this show today. I'm really, really looking forward to having a chat about online education and languages.
Oh, I am too. This is a topic I've wanted to talk about, and we haven't had the opportunity yet this season. So I'm really glad as we're rounding out the end of season 2 that you are here to speak with us and we can learn from you today. I know you are similar to me in one way in that you started out as a teacher and have moved into consulting and what I always call education adjacent work, even though it's right there in the world of education. I'm curious how the last few years have changed the work that you do with educators and in the field of education. What have you been up to?
Cool. Well, first of all, as you say, I was an educator. I taught languages. I taught French for 13 years, 3 years at secondary school level or K-12, as you say in the States, and 10 years at middle school level, so 9 to 13-year-olds. So I have upper primary and secondary school experience. And for the last 11 years now, I've been an independent languages consultant. But of course, as a result of the pandemic, I had to pivot and change dramatically how I was delivering training because of the fact that literally overnight, or certainly in a few days, everything in my diary was wiped out for obvious reasons back in March 2020. And so I had a little bit of a moment to myself, as it were, and thinking, okay, what am I going to do? But fortunately, my sort of expertise is in the use of digital technologies and how they can be used to enhance language learning, as well as across the curriculum. But the bread and butter of what I do is work with language teachers from literally all over the world. So yeah, I contacted people and I said, would you be interested in some training? And then lo and behold, one of the first things I did was for the Modern Language Teachers Association of Victoria in Melbourne, who I've worked with before face to face, and I did a webinar for them. And then schools started contacting me, and it just went from there. But also at the beginning, I decided, in collaboration with my friend Helen Myers, who's the chair of the London branch of the Association for Language Learning, we decided to put together a series of webinars, which we refer to as TILT, which is Technology and Language Teaching. And we've organized over 140 webinars since the start of the pandemic, all of which are available for free. The recordings are on my YouTube channel, which is Joe Dale 100, and also on the ALL London website. And because I've been interested in this area for many, many years, I was able to look at my contacts and essentially contact people from literally all over the world, including many language teachers or world language educators from the States. And everybody said yes. And each of those sessions was about an hour long. And everything you could possibly want to know around technology in a remote teaching context, a hybrid teaching context, or a face-to-face context is there. And it's all available absolutely for free. And it will always carry on being free as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. It sounds like you fared pretty well then. That's pretty good. Everyone had to take a beat. I feel like everyone took a beat that first week or so, and then you just took off running. And I so appreciate my teacher's heart is always happy when folks are giving things for free to educators and providing resources. And so that's fantastic. And we thank you for that work and those collaborations. They're going to do good things for educators around the world as they already have.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I know at the time, certainly at the beginning, that those first few months when I think people were just thinking, what is going on? And and the panic and everything. I know
Yes.
that people really, really appreciated the fact that right from the get-go, we were putting out these webinars and we were regularly getting 100 people attending live, which was fantastic. And then some of the recordings were watched well over 1,000 times as well, which is just lovely to see. It's lovely to know that you can help in that sort of scary situation.
Yeah, people were grasping for anything, and to be able to find something really high quality from a great source and for free is magic. So that's really cool. Well, let's dive in, my new friend. There was an article this past September, so September 2021, on EdTech Review, and I'll link to it in the show notes, but it provided online resources for educators who are looking to teach specifically about cultural diversity in their classrooms. I've used things like learningforjustice.org or facinghistory.org. I'm curious, in your work in foreign languages, what websites or tools do you recommend and for what purposes to help educators, whether they be a foreign language teacher or not, just bring in that aspect of cultural understanding and awareness of cultures around the world and what's happening?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think it's an obvious thing to say that when you're learning a language, you have to learn the culture at the same time. So they very much go hand in hand. And I checked out the article. I thought it was great. And one website which particularly resonated with me is the Google Arts and Culture website, which I include when I'm talking about how you can use virtual reality to promote language learning through motivation, through the ability to take people on a virtual trip, if you like. Well, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, when it was so difficult to travel, being able to take your students virtually was a really fantastic option, I think. And the Google Arts and Culture website has been around for a long time. There's the website version. There's also the app version, which gives you a couple of other options. For example, one of the things I like to do when I talk about using that particular website is to demonstrate some of the features that are particularly useful, I think, in languages, to use authentic resources such as the paintings of Van Gogh, for example. So there's a picture, a self-portrait picture, which I like to demonstrate. And what I had done beforehand was to use my iPad to use the mobile app so that you can actually, through augmented reality, you can have the picture of the self-portrait appearing literally, sort of in front of you, as it were, above your keyboard. So what I did was I used Zoom to record my screen, but I shared my iPad on Zoom. So I was able to show live how it worked. And then I was able to then move my iPad around the self-portrait picture and then say, for example, in a languages lesson, how you could use that for maybe describing physical description, like color of eyes, color of hair, and so on and so forth. And then the children could then create their own pictures of themselves, and they could use augmented reality, such as Flipgrid AR, which is a really nice free tool which allows you, if you have an up-to-date device, to again have that sort of graphic appear hovering over the top of the prompt that you or the trigger that you use to launch the image. You could also use an app like Halo AR, which is a similar type of app, a little bit like the old Aurasma, that's not around anymore. It was called HP Reveal as well, and then it disappeared completely. But for learners interested in augmented reality, that can be, again, a great hook, I think. Other ways of using arts and culture as well, I've talked about past, again, with, say, the classic Starry Night image of Van Gogh. You could use that as a way of being able to zoom in onto the image, and you'll see that lots of these images have been taken with a very high pixel camera, which means that you can zoom in so far that you can actually sort of see the brush strokes, for example, that Van Gogh did originally back in the day. So if you were, say, an arts teacher, I'd have thought that would be fantastic to do. Yep. And the other image that I use with Van Gogh's pictures is the bedroom scene in Arles, So again, you could use that as a way of describing the bedroom scene in the target language. But then, of course, again, you could then use that as a prompt for getting the students either to maybe draw their own pictures or to take a picture of their own bedrooms and then describe those as well. So those are a few ideas on how you can bring culture or authentic resources into the languages classroom.
I really appreciate the fact that you put a emphasis on authentic resources or primary sources, that sort of thing for students when they're learning about a culture or exploring a new culture. Because I think that's really important. We sometimes get a very diluted version of a culture when we're not in it or we're far from it. I'm curious more about augmented reality. I don't know if that's a specialty of yours, but I know that more and more of that is entering into schools. Do you think that's going to be something we see more and more of in the public schools, kindergarten through high school, that teachers can be using, whether they're online or not?
Potentially. I mean, I think that augmented reality has been around for quite a long time now, and it hasn't really taken off in the way that I was maybe expecting it to. I think that as long as we always think about the pedagogy and make sure that we're not using AR for a gimmick, I think that's incredibly important. But yeah, certainly there are some schools who have played around with AR and with VR. I think that with AR, in the example that I mentioned with Flipgrid AR, I think it's a really nice way of bringing the video or the image to life. So, for example, you could create a Christmas card and you could make a little video clip of the child wishing their parents Merry Christmas, record it as a video, and then have a QR code appearing in the Christmas card so that when the parents scan it, they can see their child saying Merry Christmas in the target language. I think that's an example which is pedagogically sound. It's engaging. It's coming from a good place, I think. Whereas I think some AR applications maybe one could argue that they're more about the sort of the gimmick as opposed. Like for example, I mean, there are various apps which allow you to create, let's say, a dinosaur that suddenly appears in the middle of your table, which could be useful. I'm not saying that that's completely a gimmick, but then what would you then use it for? You could use it for, say, a storytelling project maybe, or you could record that as a video and then add a voiceover, but that would be quite a lot of work, I think. Whereas for, say, something like Flipgrid AR, all you have to do is record a video and then you'd have the QR code, and it's not a lot more extra work. But I think that the issue around AR can be that it can be too much focus on the tech and not on the learning. And that's always a risk with technology in general. So I think the jury's still out, both on AR and on VR, to be honest with you. But when I'm talking about VR, obviously I'm talking about ways in which I think it can be used in a purposeful way.
Absolutely. I think that's always really something that's at the forefront of our minds as online educators, because there is so much out there for us. There are so many applications, there are so many programs, websites, what have you. And to find the thing that is adding value or that's solving a problem or that's making accessibility easier. And your idea for the greeting card is great because that makes the greeting card even more accessible to a lot of people. So that's another consideration as well, while also engaging in another culture through its language. So very neat. We'll have some resources in the show notes as well. We're going to curate a list of open ed resources or nearly free resources that teachers can check out if they're interested in exploring more along that line of pedagogical approach. So we know learning a foreign language can be a truly enriching part of an educational experience, and it is required in many places that students learn a foreign language. We know language is an integral part of culture, and so it's a great gateway to studying a new place, to studying and learning about a new way of life. I remember learning so much about German culture in high school while I was studying the language, and learning about different Spanish-speaking countries as well, and how the language is slightly different depending on where you physically are in the world. So if an online foreign language teacher, as we say, or languages teacher, is looking to immerse their students in the language and in the culture of a place with which they're not familiar, what are some good tools for doing so?
Great question. So I think a tool like Google Earth is a fantastic way of either putting in a search for a particular place that you want to visit and then getting a real feel for what it's like being in that place and looking at signs and things like that, and the way that the architecture of the buildings are different. And then as a result of that, you can then use that as a language learning multimedia resource. by, let's say, recording your screen. Again, in Flipgrid, you could record your screen, or you could use a tool like Screencastify in order to record what you're seeing in Google Earth. One of my favorite activities when I'm demonstrating about the use of Google Earth is on the left-hand side, there's a little a dice icon, or die, as one should say, as it's singular. And if you click on that, it's called the I'm feeling lucky option. And what I like about it is it randomly takes you literally anywhere in the world. You have no idea where you're going. And I think that's something which young people find engaging if there's a random element. So you might not be going to a country or a place where the language that you're learning is spoken, but it's the random nature of going literally anywhere in the world. So what I demonstrate when I'm doing this is I click on the I'm feeling lucky while recording my screen in Flipgrid, and then we'll then hover over a place, which could be a rural place or an urban place, or sometimes even literally on top of a mountain or in a remote island. And as long as the street view is available there, which it isn't always, but if it's too remote, but if it is available, and you can check it out by dragging the little peg man bottom right onto the pin, which appears automatically when you do this, you then go into Google Street View. And once you're there, you could then ask questions around what can you see? If there is any people there, what have they been doing? How are they feeling? What's the weather like? Are you in the town? Are you in the countryside? What time of day is it? All these sorts of things I think are really, really cool, and gives you that sort of that immersive feeling, and then the language can come from that. Similar websites, which I like to showcase as well, are things like Windows Swap, which maybe people are not as aware of. So Windows Swap, some kind people from around the world have literally recorded videos from their windows of about 10 minutes each. And then what you can do is you can click on the Windows Swap option at the bottom of the screen, and you can literally be taken anywhere in the world again. And you're told where you are by hovering over the top right of the screen. So it might be that you go to Finland or France or Canada. And again, it's really interesting to compare what you're seeing from one place to the next. So again, from a language learning point of view, you could take a screenshot. You could just do it as a whole class activity in a remote teaching or an online teaching situation. You could simply be asking the students to point out things to talk about in the target language. And the fact that it's quick and easy and you can just jump from place to place, that's really lovely, I think. And it makes you feel as if you're actually there. Another similar tool, in fact, there's a number of them that do the same sort of thing. Another one is called Drive and Listen. That's driveandlisten.com. And that makes you feel as if you're inside a taxi or you're inside a car and you're moving around a city. And all these cities are listed on the right-hand side. And you can even have the local radio playing as well, which makes you feel even more immersed.
Oh, wow.
And again, you could be asking the students what they can see, what words are they picking up, what signs are they seeing, and that sort of thing. But it does feel as if you're actually there. So if you were, let's say, sharing your screen in a completely online situation, I think that would work really nicely. And you could have the students making comments in the chat or turning on their microphones and saying what they can see, etc. Similarly, there's a one called citywalks.live, which allows you to, as the name suggests, that you can be walking around a city, and you can, again, you have a list of the places you can go to. You can either have the sort of the city noise or have it muted. You can choose whether you're walking through the daytime or at nighttime, which is quite cool. So those are a few ideas. And then my favorite one for this type of website is virtualvacation.us/guess. And what that allows you to do, this is the warning I have to say beforehand, is you can easily lose half an hour on this website. What it allows you to do, you can basically visit places. You can choose the country. You can choose capital city one. That's my favorite one. So I would recommend everyone listening to this podcast, try out the capital cities one, because what it allows you to do is you're taken somewhere and you have to guess where you are. All you know is it's a capital city somewhere in the world. And then at the bottom of the page, and it's like a rolling video, which I've never tested how long it runs for, but I would imagine probably 5 or 10 minutes. So in that 5 or 10 minutes, you have to work out, again, based on the visual clues. So it's all about critical thinking and problem solving and working out where you are, etc. You then click on the guess icon, and then it shows you a map, and you have to click on the map where you think it is. And that's a lot of fun when I've done this in a in a virtual session with teachers, language teachers, and they're writing in the chat where they think it is, and I think, well, I think it's this place, and then we see who's right, and that's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, that's my favorite one out of all those virtual reality types of sites.
These resources sound really engaging and really fun, and they're taking me back a bit to when I was in high school and learning foreign language. The way I learned Spanish and the way I learned German were very different. My German teacher took a conversational approach, and we used to actually memorize scripts, little vignettes, and things like, I'm walking down the stairs to the basement, don't bump your head, which I can't remember how to say in German, but I remember that was the phrase. Whereas in Spanish, we learned in a less authentic way. You learned how to conjugate verbs and how the order of a sentence and semantics and those sorts of things. But these applications that you're talking about, these websites really seem to lend themselves to that more conversational approach where you could have kids sitting in that virtual taxi and, okay, we're going to talk about what's on the radio. Do you like it or not? Go ahead. And that's a way to practice the language while doing something that is a bit more authentic, or even when they're guessing what capital city they're in, doing that in the language and applying what they're learning. I think that would be really fun and possibly really challenging, but an engaging way to use those tools as well.
Absolutely. And they could obviously take screenshots. They could put that into another type of tool like Book Creator, for example, and they could record their voice, practicing the sorts of dialogues that you just mentioned. They could do the same thing in Google Slides or in Microsoft Class Notebook. So having that visual element, I think is really important from a cultural point of view. So going back to what you've just said, actually, I think that sort of grammatical approach as opposed to a cultural approach or an approach more to communication, to be honest with you, I think both are absolutely fantastic. I think, as I said right at the beginning, that the culture has to go with the language, but I also think that a focus on grammar is also really, really important. So what I think these sorts of websites lend themselves to, and authentic resources in general, is to try and find unusual context for typical usual language that you'll find in your schemes of work. So you're always trying to find, I think, innovative ways of presenting the language that you know that you have to cover based on your scheme of work. And by using these sorts of websites, using virtual reality can be a way of hooking the students in and encouraging them to speak or to talk or what have you. But it's all about, I think, certainly in the modern day, it's all about trying to find exciting, engaging resources which are relevant to young people. And that's why I think these sorts of websites are a hit. But obviously, it's down to the individual to work out the best way of using them. I think, as I said, doing them live in a sort of a live session, that would be great. You could take screenshots. You could record your screen. You could make an animated GIF maybe of different windows. There's a fantastic free app called gifcap.dev, which I really like, which allows you to record your screen a little bit like Screencastify or Flipgrid, but it allows you to turn what you've recorded into an animated GIF automatically. So you could, for example, go through a few of the window swap ones beforehand, make a few GIFs, and then post those GIFs into, let's say, Google Slides, and then get the students to collaborate on the same slide. They could record their voice. They could use a tool, a Chrome extension like Mote, M-O-T-E, which allows them to record their voice and put it into the Google Slides presentation. They could also use that for leaving audio comments to each other as well. That could be really cool. There's lots of ways in which you could use these sorts of ideas. But the most important thing is that we focus on the language, and then the context, the cultural context, I think is very important. But we mustn't use that as an excuse for not covering the language. And there's always that risk, I think.
Absolutely. There's always a balance, right? There seems to be in all good things in education, this natural tension between two, not necessarily opposing forces, but two things that just kind of pull you in slightly different ways. So we will have links to all of these fantastic resources in the show notes. I can't wait to dive in and explore some of them myself. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to keep talking about language learning specifically and the different approaches that there are and what online teachers can be doing. So stick with us. What's the one thing all online schools and programs struggle with? Student engagement and the ability to truly personalize interventions. How do we solve those problems? With the use of Admin Dash, a brand new Canvas LTI tool from SYS Education. Admin Dash allows online teachers to see a risk assessment score that proactively identifies students who may need more specialized attention or intervention, and offers a communication log that provides an outlet for complete transparency among teachers, admin, students, and families. At just 99 cents per student per year, and with no minimum price and no fees, you can't afford to not use Admin Dash. For more information about Admin Dash, contact sales at syseducation.org and start connecting proactively with your online learners. Welcome back. I am talking to Joe Dale. He is an expert in languages and technology, and he is helping us merge the two for our online educators so that we can be providing really robust foreign language instruction in our online classrooms. There's a question I'm kind of burning to ask. We know there's no shortage of websites. There's no shortage of applications that allow adults and kids alike to learn a new language, right? We have Rosetta Stone or Babbel or Duolingo, and the list goes on. What do you see as the pros and cons of schools using programs such as those instead of live instructors? Or is there another way that we can be engaging students in language learning online?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and there's a myriad ways I could answer it, but let me try my best. So, I think the succinct answer is I think that technology can lend itself really well to promoting independent learning. So the sorts of sites that you've mentioned, sites like Quizlet and Duolingo and those sorts of sites, what are fantastic about them is they can promote autonomy. They can give learners the opportunity of learning on the move, wherever they may be. If they're at home, if they're on the bus, they can have, let's say, an app on their phone, and they can access their learning whenever they want to. And that's really, really cool from the point of view of, again, motivation. And they can work at their own pace, and they can get immediate feedback. And a lot of these websites are really, really good at doing that, I think, and really, really encouraging the students in. And you can get, in some cases, regular reminders of the words you need to work on or the phrases you need to work on. It's also really good from the teacher point of view because they normally, in most of these tools, they'll get evidence of how the students are getting on. They can maybe export the results as an Excel spreadsheet and that sort of thing. So they have evidence and they have a specific look on how the individual students are doing. Because again, to use another sort of term, personalized learning, I think that these sorts of tools really promote personalized learning, even though I believe at the time when personalized learning was first sort of mooted in the UK, no one really knew what it meant. But I think that personalized learning from the point of view of using technology, whereby each person can work at their own pace and you can learn on the move, I think that is, in my opinion, a good use of personalized learning. But on a wider level, when we're talking about the learning on those sorts of resources, and can they replace a face-to-face teacher or an online teacher, I would say absolutely not. I think that they supplement the learning, and particularly for those students who are really keen and just can't get enough of language learning, and we've all had students like that, these sorts of websites are absolutely fantastic. The other thing I wanted to say as well is in addition to sort of like the standard webinars that I run, I also do these sort of clinic sessions from time to time. And the idea behind a clinic session is instead of me just presenting content, I ask, let's say a week before, for the people who are going to be attending the session to send me questions, which could be done via, say, Google form. So they just write in any question they might have around technology and languages, which is, again, motivating for me because it's not always the same old type of content, but it's actually really engaging. A bit like with the preparation for this webinar, and this podcast, and you sent me through like the sorts of things you wanted me to talk about, and then I sort of populated with the sorts of websites I wanted to talk about, and that was really cool. I had a question around quizzing tools in this sort of area. And it was a great question. So the teacher was saying, she implied that she'd been teaching for a number of years. She was an experienced teacher. And she wanted to know, did I think that quizzing tools were more around teacher efficiency? In other words, saving time and being able to get the evidence, etc., in the way that I've talked about? Or actually, are they more to do with learning? And I thought that was fantastic. So what I did was, as I normally do in this sort of situation, is I ask my Twitter community, known as the MFL Twitterati. which if people haven't heard of the MFL Twitterati, they've been around for many, many years, officially since about 2008. And the hashtag is used by people all over the world, similar to LangChat for world language educators in the States. It's been around for about the same amount of time, I would say. And I manage the list MFL Twitterers. So MFL, for people that don't know, stands for Modern Foreign Languages. So the MFL Twitterers list, which you can see on my Twitter profile, it's got over 2,200 members, but the hashtag is used by 2,200 subscribers, and there's 5,000 members, which is the maximum number of people you can have on a list. So when I don't know the answer to something, I want to crowdsource a question, I put it out to the MFL Twitterati, and that's what I did for this particular question. In fact, all the questions that I had for the clinic. And then what I did was I made a compilation of all the answers, and some of the answers that came in for that particular question. So if we focus on the learning, first of all, some of the teachers were saying things like, well, what's great about websites like Quizlet or Duolingo is they use algorithms. So as a result of those algorithms, the individual student can be identified as being not so strong on a particular set of words. And so they're sent reminders. It will, for those words that the student has mastered, they won't have to go over the same content. So it's being very clever, I think, with that algorithm. It's also a great way of promoting retrieval practice, which is certainly something in the UK. Lots of people have been talking about for many years off the back of this sort of general movement around an evidence-based approach to teaching, language teaching and teaching full stop. And there's been lots of events around the research ed movement. People like Tom Bennett, who's the president of the person in charge of the research ed movement. Lots of ideas around retrieval practice and spaced repetition and low stakes testing. And I think these sorts of quizzing tools lend themselves really well to this sort of evidence-based approach. And that's one reason why teachers really like them.
Absolutely. When you were speaking, it made me think of a text I read a few years ago that I use with educators called Neuroscience for Teachers. It was actually published in the UK a few years back by Richard Church's Eleanor Dommett and Ian Devonshire. And they talk so much about the importance of quizzing and spaced learning and mixing up your learning, all of that. And I think that is one thing those websites do and those apps do really well, is that they mix that up. So the skill you learned a few weeks ago or a few modules back, they're bringing it back up again. So that's where the algorithm is a good thing. I also really am appreciative that you talked about how you can't just throw the teacher totally out of it, though. You need that human to be there too, to be looking at the data, right? I think sometimes we look at personalized learning and we're like, okay, plop the kid on the app and just let it go. And that's maybe where we get into trouble. That is where we get into trouble. And so to keep that expert's eye, that educator's eye on what's happening, and to be able to intervene as well, because you never know when the point of frustration is coming. My 5-year-old was using Rosetta Stone for a bit, but she would hit a frustration point, sooner than you or I would, because she's 5. And so she needs an adult to be there and let her know, okay, let's take a break. It's fine. You're doing great. And step back. So personalized learning, the algorithms, all of that, potentially good things, but also grounded in neuroscience and all of that. But also you need that educator. You need that human point of contact to make sure that it is going well and that it will continue to. I think that's really essential.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think also, if we're just looking at the receptive skills, that's all very well, but there's obviously the productive skills. There's particularly, I think, speaking, and I think technology lends itself really, really nicely to that. The way in which you can make screencasts, as I've talked about, you can make podcasts if you wanted to, or certainly something creative around using a tool like Vocaroo, and the students can record themselves. They can then send the link to a teacher via, say, Google Form. That's a tip I normally share with people, or a Microsoft Form. You can create a form with different short user answers, whereby the students put their name in, they put in the link to the Vocaroo, and then the teacher can then generate a spreadsheet and can download all the different bits of audio, and then could put it into a tool like Anchor.fm, and then publish it as a podcast, or just host it on Google Drive or Google Classroom or what have you. So I think there's lots of ways in which you can use the technology. Yes, you can use it for the receptive skills, but also I think from the point of view of engaging the students with getting them to create their own content, of the ownership of their work and these sorts of things, making animations and animated GIFs and movies, short little movies for practicing the language, that's also really important. And I think that they certainly would need some guidance at the beginning to do that, and they certainly would need some guidance on the feedback as well. So this idea that the technology will replace the students, will replace the teachers, is absolutely not the case. And what the teacher is good at, I think, is all the soft skills and the empathy and the encouragement, and that's definitely required either in a face-to-face or an online context. And in fact, I would say that in an online context, that's even more challenging. That sort of the relationship that the teacher has with the students. Certainly, in my experience of doing all this online training, when I've been working either in an individual session or sometimes over, say, 10 sessions of an hour and a half or 3 hours each, which I've done a few times, creating that sort of that good working relationship and that good dynamic, I think it's more challenging in an online course in the way that you can't walk around and look over people's shoulders as you can in a face-to-face class, but you can still do it. And I think that all those things that you would normally do of encouragement and kind words and feedback and praise can be done absolutely in an online situation. And I think that with technology as it is, there are certainly lots of multimodal approaches, particularly voice, which can be very effective in not only in speaking production, but also in audio feedback.
Absolutely. I mean, you just can't erase the human element of teaching and learning. You really can't. And even in fully online schools, we obviously do not do that. We keep it real. That kind of leads me into my last question, if you have time. I have one final question I've been asking all my guests this season. Speaking of teachers and soft skills and that connecting to students, I know we all have that one teacher, at least, maybe more, in our past who had a really positive impact on us, either just as a kiddo or maybe throughout our whole lives. But I'm curious for you, Joe, do you have a teacher you remember from your school days who had a lasting positive impact on you?
I do indeed. In fact, surprise, surprise, he was my Spanish teacher. But what was funny about that was the fact that in the grammar school that I went to like a school for like a general school to start off with, like a secondary modern, I suppose you describe it as in the UK, whereby we learnt French. In fact, we learnt French at the start of the end of primary, but officially when I went to secondary, we learnt French for those first 2 years, and I seemed to be reasonably good at it. And then we went to the grammar school that was selective, and then I wanted to carry on with French, but I wanted to do technical drawing, and they wouldn't let me do technical drawing. They insisted that I do Spanish because I was too good at French. There we are. So as a result of that, I did Spanish, which I don't regret. And I actually went on and did it for 6 years, including advanced level or A-level studies, which, in the UK anyway, once you've done your general exams, GCE as it works, I'm a little bit old now, as opposed to GCSE, which is then, changed in 1988, I think, if I remember correctly. But anyway, so I did my GCE in various subjects, and then you choose 3 or 4 A-level or advanced level subjects, one of which was Spanish. And so if I had done technical drawing, if I had have done what I wanted to do and they didn't let me do Spanish, I would have lost out in that way. But the reason I liked my Spanish teacher is because I suppose with any teacher that you like, I found him funny. I found him cool. He would talk about, I felt that he was being authentic. Again, going back to authenticity, I felt that he was saying what he really thought. And I think sometimes teachers come across as being, not themselves or false, or certainly I think in my experience anyway, and I think this is true when I was a student and having been a teacher as well for 13 years, I think students are very adept at picking up when you mean what you say or when you're being authentic. And certainly from my Spanish teacher, Mr. Langton, all those years ago, I really liked him and I wanted to work for him. And I think, again, that's a sign of a really good teacher, when you want to do the work for the teacher. And then as I said, I carried on. I did A-level, so I was with him for 6 years, and he was great. And I suppose in lots of ways, I wanted to model myself a little bit on him. That's a sort of classic thing a teacher would say, to model the sorts of things that he would do and his approach. And yeah, and he could be strict as well, but he just had this sort of wit around him, which I really liked. And if the students are feeling relaxed and comfortable and enjoy a joke, they're going to learn better, aren't they? I mean, that's an obvious thing to say, but it's all about intrinsic motivation, I think, and he had that in spades, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, that's awesome. Well, we are so glad you had him in your life, because now we have you in our lives, and so it all comes through. Joe, thank you so much for speaking with me today. If our listeners want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about your work, how can they find you?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed appearing on the podcast. I'm a big fan of podcasts. So my first podcast was back in 2006. So I think I was probably, certainly in the UK, the first French teacher, let's say, based in England who did a podcast. So if people want to get in contact with me, probably the easiest way is on Twitter. I'm just at Joe Dale on Twitter. I've got now over 33,500 followers, which is a little bit crazy, but I have been on Twitter since 2007. So that's a great place to connect with me there. Also, my YouTube channel, which has all these fantastic recordings of all these different webinars that I talked about at the top. That's available at Joe Dale 100 as in the figures. So do check me out there. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. Just search for Joe Dale on LinkedIn and you will find me there as well. And I would love to hear from people. I'd love to hear some reflections and thoughts on how you're using technology in the languages classroom, particularly in an online education environment. I think that's really, really fascinating. I think we've all had to learn so much by going into that sort of remote emergency teaching context back in March 2020. I think it would be fantastic to hear different people's testimonials. And in a way, that's what the Tilt webinars were all about. It was just about sharing good practice, hearing everyone's individual story. And if you've enjoyed listening to this and you'd like to know more, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Yes, we love hearing from our listeners and interacting, especially on Twitter. That's definitely a good spot to find everyone in education these days.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Joe. We really appreciate your insight, really appreciate your passion and knowledge around languages and technology and just getting kids 100% immersed in learning a language and experiencing a culture. So thanks for the work you do and thanks for chatting with me today. We'll catch you up soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest today, Joe Dale. Joe taught us that there are a number of online tools we can use to engage kids in language learning. He helped us uncover new ways of approaching language learning in the online classroom as well. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if you haven't before, head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to start receiving the AOE newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter from me to you with an episode-related thought or two to inspire and encourage you. Want to connect? On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. I love hearing from you. And if you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education and our products and services, head over to syseducation.org. Lastly, this podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including our dream team consisting of sound engineer Natalie Farrell, graphic designer and social media and website manager Lexi Warren, and our producer, Bo Neal. Thanks for listening today, and remember, we can learn new things